11 o'clock at night, on the 4th of July, Christine Wansley's phone rings. It's one of her son's friends. Nolan isn't with them. Nobody's seen him for hours. She doesn't wait. She starts looking for him herself. And one of the things she does is open the app that tracks her son's phone. The phone isn't on Horn Island. It's already back on the mainland. She's looking at a dot on a map, and for a moment, that dot is her son. It isn't. It's a device that came home without him. Nolan Wells's phone made it back that night. Nolan didn't. Here's what you're going to get in the next half hour. The GPS record of that boat's entire day from state marine data. The two accounts of Nolan's last known hour that the internet has spent 3 weeks calling a contradiction, and why the record doesn't support that word. What an independent autopsy, just released, did and did not find. And one more thing, which I want you holding the whole way through. There is a recording from that afternoon. A real one, with a voice on it, made while it was happening. Almost nobody arguing about this case online has actually reckoned with what's on it. I'm going to play you through the entire public version of this story first, the version everyone has been fighting about, and then I'm going to tell you what that recording says, because it changes which side you think is lying. And there's one line on it that nobody can agree on. What you will not get is a name attached to blame. Nobody has been charged. Nobody has been named a suspect. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has said it has not identified foul play. That isn't me holding something back. That's the record. This is the Nolan Wells case. Horn Island sits about 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. Federally protected wilderness. No roads, no docks, no running water, no cell service you'd trust your life to. You get there by private boat, or you don't get there at all. The 4th of July is the exception. Every year, the water off its northwestern tip fills with boats. Attorneys for the family have put the number of people there that day at around 200. It's a party held an hour from the nearest hospital by water, with no lifeguards and no authority of any kind on the sand. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18. A wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, the kind of athlete his coaches were building next season around. There's a version of this where I list who he was, and it does nothing but delay the story. So here's the only biographical fact that matters for what follows. Football camp started in 2 days. He had a hard deadline. He had a car. He had a reason to be home that night that had nothing to do with anybody's goodwill, and everyone who knew him knew it. Hold on to that, because when we get to the part where he supposedly decided to stay behind on an island with no way off it, that deadline is the thing that doesn't fit. He went out that morning with 3 friends. He was the only black person in the group. If you were on Horn Island that day, you already know how many phones were out. Somebody watching this has footage they haven't looked at properly yet. Tell me in the comments what you'd want checked first. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources keeps GPS records on registered vessels. That gives us something almost nothing else in this story has. A record that doesn't depend on anyone remembering anything. CBS News obtained it. Here's the day. At 9:56 in the morning, the boat leaves a private dock in Ocean Springs. Nolan is aboard. At 11:14, it anchors off Horn Island. For the next 5 hours, nothing anyone has described sounds unusual. Investigators have since interviewed more than 60 people. Nobody has described anything that reads, in hindsight, as a warning. At 4:31 in the afternoon, the boat leaves Horn Island. By 6:06, it's back at the dock, and by evening, it's on a trailer heading to the boat owner's home in Biloxi. The data also shows 2 short trips into a nearby waterway that evening. Those movements are in the public record, and no investigator or prosecutor has publicly attached any meaning to them. Anyone telling you what they signify is telling you something the record doesn't say. I want to be exact about the times, because a lot of coverage hasn't been, and I've watched people in comment sections correct videos that put the afternoon events at 11 at night. The boat left the island at 4:31 in the afternoon. Christine's phone rang at 11 at night. That's 6.5 hours in which an 18-year-old was alone on federal wilderness with no phone, and nobody who loved him knew it. There's one more piece of the timeline, and it has only just surfaced. On the 21st of July, a video recorded on Horn Island that afternoon was published. The metadata timestamps it at 2:23. Picture what's in that frame. Somebody is holding up a phone at a party. The camera swings across the water. Boats anchored in neck-deep water, people floating between them, coolers, music from a dozen different speakers bleeding into each other. The lens drifts right and settles, for about a second, on a young black man standing on the back deck of a boat in swim trunks, bending down for a drink. His face never turns toward the camera. Whoever was filming put the phone down and got on with their day. It was one clip among thousands shot on that beach. Weeks later, watching this case on the news, they went back through their own camera roll, saw the color of the trunks, and thought, that might be him. They took it to the sheriff's office and left a copy with a detective. Investigators have confirmed they're aware of it. They have not said whether they can confirm who it is. They may never be able to. The face isn't there. So let me be precise, because a lot of coverage hasn't been. This is not the last image of Nolan Wells. It's a clip that might be the last image of Nolan Wells, and the distance between those two sentences is the distance between reporting and guessing. But sit with the version where it is him. Somebody stood on a beach and filmed a stranger reaching for a drink, and they did not know they might be recording the final moving image of a person who would be dead within 48 hours. Nobody in that frame knew. The boats keep drifting. Somebody laughs off camera. The clip ends because the person filming got bored and lowered their arm. Officially, Nolan was last seen around 3 in the afternoon. The boat left at 4:31. Whatever happened, happened in there. Now the part everyone's been arguing about, and the part I think has been argued about wrongly. There are 2 accounts of Nolan's last known hour. The first comes from his friends. They've said their boat began taking on water in the late afternoon, that they had to leave in a hurry, and that Nolan told them he'd get a ride back with somebody else because he'd met a girl. One of them, Trayston Shepard, said publicly on national television that Nolan wanted to stay because of her, and that it seemed like he really did like her. For several days, that was the whole story. It traveled fast, because it's the kind of thing that happens at a party every summer. Then the family's legal team found the girl. Her name is Katie. I'm not giving you her surname, and here's why. The FBI is currently investigating interstate threats made against people connected to this case. Some of them are teenagers. I'm not adding to that. Katie was on Horn Island that day with her own friends, and went home safely that night on a different boat. What she has said, through the family's attorney, is that she and Nolan met on the beach, talked a while, then parted, and that she understood him to be heading back to rejoin his group. So here's how it got framed. His friends say he stayed for a girl. The girl says he told her he was leaving. One of them must be lying. Except read the 2 accounts properly, and that framing falls apart. Katie has never claimed she watched Nolan get on a boat. She said they parted, and that she assumed he'd gone back to his friends. She wasn't standing at the water's edge with a stopwatch. She was an 18-year-old at a party who talked to someone and walked away, the way you do 100 times in one summer and forget by September. And his friends have never claimed they watched him decide to stay. They've said he told them he'd find another ride. Neither account contains the moment that matters. Neither of these people saw what happened after Nolan walked out of their line of sight. They each describe the last few minutes they personally had with him, and neither of those minutes was the one that counted. That's not two stories in conflict. That's two people describing the edges of a whole. His mother has said publicly that she doesn't accept the version where he chose to stay. His father put it in 8 words at the July press conference. The things we're being told, that wasn't Nolan. And they may be right. But the reason to doubt that version isn't that somebody's been caught lying. It's the football camp. It's the car. It's a phone he never went back for. Which brings me to the recording. For 3 weeks, the detail that made people most suspicious of Nolan's friends was the boat. A boat that supposedly broke down at exactly the convenient moment. A story about a bilge pump that nobody outside that boat could confirm. Then NBC News obtained the audio of a call placed to a private towing company from Horn Island that afternoon. You can hear the boat's operator asking for help. He says they're at the west tip of Horn. He says the bilge pump has stopped working. He says they're sinking, and he asks them to please come. Hold that in your head for a second, because it changes the shape of everything we just built. If you want the rest of this told straight, subscribe. Now listen to what it actually means. That call is the first piece of hard evidence in this case that isn't somebody's memory of a chaotic day. It's recorded. It's time-stamped. It was obtained independently by a national news organization from a third party with no stake in any of this. And it corroborates the account that 3 weeks of the internet had decided was the cover story. If the boat was genuinely taking on water, then we had to leave fast isn't a convenient excuse. It's the only thing a sinking boat produces: panic, a rushed head count, and a bad decision made in 90 seconds by 4 teenagers who'd never had to make one before. But there's a line on that recording that I can't resolve for you, and I've watched people argue about it in good faith on both sides. At one point, asked about the people on the boat, the caller says, "Yeah, everybody is on board." Everybody. Read it one way, and it's the whole case. If everybody was on board at the moment that call was made, then Nolan was on that boat when it left the island, and everything we have been told about him staying behind collapses. Read it the other way, and it's the most ordinary sentence in the world. A man on a sinking boat is asked whether anyone is in the water. Nobody is in the water. Everybody who's coming is aboard. He says yes. He is not taking attendance. He is trying not to sink. I've heard both readings argued by people who clearly care about getting this right, and I want to be honest with you. I don't know which one is correct, and neither does anyone else who isn't holding the full recording and the full investigative file. What I can tell you is that a grand jury will eventually get to hear that tape in full, in context, with the person who said it available to explain what he meant. Until then, anybody telling you that line proves something is choosing a reading and selling it to you as a fact. Then there's the phone. When Christine finally got it back, after a friend collected it from where the app said it was, she expected what any parent would. Photos from a beach on the 4th of July. Messages. Nolan posted constantly. That was known about him. There was nothing from that day. Now, Snapchat messages expire on their own within 24 hours. That's ordinary, and on its own, it explains the absence completely. But there's a real, forensically provable difference between a message that expired and one that was deleted. One leaves nothing. The other leaves a trace that it existed and was removed. That difference is exactly why the family's legal team requested an independent forensic extraction, and why the FBI is assisting with the digital evidence. That assistance isn't the smoking gun it's been reported as. Horn Island is federal land, and the sheriff has said his office works with the Bureau routinely. As of this recording, The results of that extraction have not been made public. And there's a question underneath that one, which I haven't seen a single official answer to. Every conversation about digital evidence in this case has been about Nolan's phone. There were at least 3 other phones on that boat. Whether any of them have been examined and what they showed is not something the public record currently tells us. I'm not implying anything by saying that. I'm telling you it's a gap, and that a grand jury is the body that gets to close it. So the phone came home on the night of the 4th of July. It came home empty. And the one question it could answer is the one nobody has answered. On the 22nd of July, at the NOC National Convention in Chicago, Attorney Ben Crump read out the preliminary findings of the independent autopsy. It was performed on the 10th of July by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C. It was paid for by the former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick. Nolan's body had been flown out of Mississippi to be examined by someone with no professional ties to Mississippi law enforcement. Cause of death: undetermined, pending investigation. Manner of death: undetermined. Date of death: unknown. No fractures, no deep tissue injuries, no apparent lacerations. And one finding that hasn't resolved into anything: an area of red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. The report draws no conclusion about it. A chief medical examiner in Texas, uninvolved in the case, told CNN a finding like that could represent decomposition of the musculature, or it could be blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. Could be either. That's where it sits. Mitchell was explicit about why he couldn't go further. The body had been decomposing for days before it reached him. He couldn't directly observe the airway and lungs for water. He couldn't directly observe the stomach. Portions of the throat had been retained by the state medical examiner, which his report notes is standard practice. And the original toxicology results hadn't reached him. There's a line in his report that tells you what he was trying to establish and couldn't. When a body is found in water and there's a suspicion of drowning, he wrote, it's important to confirm how that person entered the water. And he added that this matters especially for people who could swim. Nolan could swim. The state's own autopsy was performed on the 7th of July, and that was weeks ago. Its results have not been released. It's waiting on toxicology, which is standard, and which takes weeks. Christine stood at that press conference and said the thing she's been saying since the beginning, in 7 words. The only question we have is, what happened to our son? She has called the lack of information from the investigation concerning. Now, the other side of this, at full weight, because it's real, and it doesn't go away because the questions above are real too. Sheriff John Ledbetter has said publicly that no foul play has been identified. His detectives have interviewed more than 60 witnesses. The 3 friends on that boat have been interviewed in depth, and authorities have said they're cooperating. All 3 have since retained attorneys, which the family has noted, and which is not evidence of anything. It's what any competent adult would tell a teenager under national suspicion to do. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind told CNN there were no immediate signs of physical injury, and has said his office receives drowning cases out of those waters regularly. That last part matters more than it sounds. This is not a stretch of coast where a drowning would be extraordinary. It's a stretch of coast where drownings are a recurring part of a coroner's caseload. And the water off that particular tip of the island is genuinely dangerous. People there that afternoon described the current strengthening as the day went on, strong enough that boaters were tying coolers to their hulls to keep from losing them to open water. Nolan was an 18-year-old athlete. He wasn't a trained open water swimmer, and there's no equivalence between the two. A current doesn't check anyone's 40 time before it pulls. If you stop the story right there, accidental drowning holds together completely. It's what investigators leaned toward in the first week, and nothing released since has moved them off it. But it doesn't answer the question that's kept this on national news for 3 weeks. 200 people, broad daylight. An athlete goes under, and not one person sees it, and not one person raises an alarm, and no one comes forward afterward to say they saw a struggle in the water. Both things are true at once. The water really was that dangerous, and it's still strange that nobody saw anything. I don't get to collapse that into an answer. Neither does anyone else, yet. One more thing happened, and it's the newest piece of this. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the agency whose GPS data gave us the entire timeline you heard earlier, wrote to a news outlet returning a $50 records processing fee. In that letter, the agency said it had previously, and I'm quoting, inadvertently released records in relation to this matter. It went on to say the Jackson County District Attorney had since notified the department that there's an ongoing death investigation which will be presented to a grand jury, and that its records relating to this matter are therefore exempt from public disclosure. Read that again slowly. The timeline this entire episode is built on, the one piece of hard, neutral, machine-generated evidence in this case, was released by mistake, and that window is now closed. That isn't a conspiracy. It's what happens when a routine records request collides with an investigation nobody expected to grow this large, and the DA is doing what a DA does before a grand jury. But the effect is exactly what a family that already doesn't trust this process would fear. Almost everything reported in the last 3 weeks came from documents obtained around the official investigation rather than from it. That route is now shut. Meanwhile, the grand jury hasn't been seated. It can't be until the investigation it depends on is finished. And that investigation is waiting on toxicology, which is waiting on a lab. Here's where this stands. On the day I'm recording this, Nolan Wells got on a boat, believing he'd be home for dinner and at football camp in 2 days. Around 2:23 that afternoon, a stranger may have filmed the last moving image of him that will ever exist, and didn't know it. 2 accounts of his final hour both hold up, and neither covers the moment that matters. A recording confirms the boat really was sinking, and contains one line that could mean everything or nothing. His phone came home without him, and came home empty. An independent autopsy answered almost nothing, and left one mark on the back of his head that could mean 2 entirely different things. The state's results still aren't public. The GPS records were released by accident and have been closed. The grand jury hasn't been seated. No one has been charged. No one has been named a suspect. But there is something still owed, and it's specific. Dr. Mitchell's report is preliminary. To finish it, he's asked Mississippi for 3 things. He needs to examine Nolan's throat tissue, which the state retained. He needs the lungs, so he can establish whether there was water in them. And he needs the original autopsy photographs, taken on the 7th of July, when the body could still show what it can no longer show. A throat, a pair of lungs, a set of photographs. That's what stands between Christine Wansley and an answer, not a theory, not a comment section. 3 physical things, sitting in a building in Mississippi that haven't been handed over. And there's a car. A few days after his son disappeared, Elmore Wansley drove to the house where Nolan had stayed the night before the trip to collect his son's keys off the boat. He pulled up to the property. The boat was there on its trailer, back from the island, dry, sitting in the yard. And so was Nolan's car, parked exactly where his son had left it on the morning of the 3rd, because Nolan was going to drive it home on the night of the 4th, and then drive it to football camp on the 6th. Elmore got the keys. He walked past his son's car to get back to his own, and he drove home without either of them. Christine should be watching her son leave for camp right now. Instead, she's waiting on a lab, a grand jury, and 3 pieces of her child that somebody else is still holding. When she gets them, we'll cover what they say, whatever they say. Subscribe if you want to be here for that. And send this to whoever told you they already knew what happened. If you were on Horn Island on the 4th of July and you have footage from between 2 and 5 in the afternoon, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office is still asking for exactly that. Details in the description. Keep the comments respectful. Everyone in this story is somebody's child, and one of their mothers is going to read them.